Asylums in India have been described as spaces of detention and safe custody, not only by researchers, but also by superintendents and medical personnel that oversaw institutions, most of whom were members of the board committee, some of whom were members of the board committee, which conducted an evaluation of 19 mental asylums and made recommendations for the improvement of hospital infrastructure and expansion of health services in 1946. While India found its feet as a new nation state, around the world, political and ideological opposition to institutions developed in the early 1960s. These movements were driven by the principle of normalization, which called for making regular or common circumstances and ways of life available to all individuals with psychosocial disabilities. They fueled policies and programs for reforming and improving institutions. In Scandinavian countries, dormitories disappeared. The size of institutions and living units decreased. Care became more active. Some countries accelerated the process and advocated for complete closure of mental institutions. Their experiences highlighted a number of challenges to the process of deinstitutionalization. These include lack of adequate community mental health services, lower allocation of funds from mental hospitals to community care services, lower trained professionals in the provision of community services, increase in the number of homeless mentally ill, increase in instances of trans-institutionalization. In India, based on the recommendations of the board committee, India began its initiatives towards community mental health formulated in the National Mental Health Program, followed by the District Mental Health Program in 1972 to District Mental Health Program 1984 to 1990s. Discussions in India hovered over concerns about living conditions within the hospital, poor hospital infrastructure and functioning, lack of trained staff, need for outpatient emergency, daycare and rehabilitation services, need for specialized services for children, alcohol and drug abuse, and for the criminally mentally ill, need for community linkages, need to strengthen psychiatry training, and a role for the mental hospitals in such training. Mechanisms for internal and external monitoring and development of mental health services in the general hospitals. India moved towards community mental health, retaining mental hospitals as central to the system of mental health care, thereby retaining institutions as central to healthcare systems. Through policy documents, the community is seen as a site for expansion of psychiatric services. This led to experiments in community mental health service provision in different parts of the country. While experiments in the form of community mental health began to take root, mental hospitals and other colonial institutions were left untouched. There was a rhetoric of reform, but there were very few inroads in the direction or the process of reform. Parallel to policy shifts within systems were judicial interventions, which have emerged as responses to public interest litigations by groups advocating for the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Decisions on the judicial front have led to increased monitoring of institutions by the national, including institutions like the National Commission of Human Rights in 1999 and 1913, which published a report in these 2 years. The Commission, in its report, made recommendations for improvement of institutions. The fire at Eravadi in 2001 that led to the death of 28 persons with psychosocial disabilities was another watershed moment in India. This led to a number of PILs that renewed discussions on the human rights violations of persons with disabilities. However, in a counterintuitive move from the position before 2001, the courts directed state governments to establish new mental institutions within states that did not have them. Set within this context of discussions and debates was also the proceedings for 2 new laws within the country. And within that context, in 2017, the Supreme Court, in a judgment on a public interest litigation filed by Advocate Gaurav Bansal Kumar, passed an order mandating state governments to set up rehabilitation homes for persons who are living in mental institutions, who have been cured, who have no need for hospitalization, who are homeless or have not been accepted by their families. This landmark decision placed the onus on state governments and union territories to set up provisions for movement of people who were well but still forced to live within hospitals. In addition to the mandate to set up living facilities, the court directed governments to set up guidelines for the discharge of people who did not need to live at the hospital, but who did not have anywhere else to go. It was within this context that the government of Maharashtra signed an MOU with NGOs and other departments to develop methods of rehabilitation for long stay patients at 4 mental hospitals in Maharashtra. I worked with one such organization to develop a pilot for deinstitutionalization of long stay recovered women at the Pune Regional Mental Hospital. Long stay recovered women under the project were women who had lived at the hospital for more than 3 years. They were women who had been admitted by the police, those whose families have not been traced, or those admitted by families who have refused to support discharge procedures over time. The project was designed from a rights-based perspective in an attempt to ensure that the provision of Article 19, to which India is a signatory. Article 19 of the UNCRPD ensures that state parties recognize the equal rights of all persons with disabilities to live in communities with choices equal to others. It also mandates that the state takes appropriate measures to facilitate full enjoyment of this right and full inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities in the community. This includes having the opportunity to choose one's place of residence, where and with whom someone would like to live, and not be obliged to live in a particular living arrangement. It also includes having access to a range of in-home, residential, and community support services to support living and inclusion in communities. Using the article as the guide, the project worked to enable independent living in open communities. Coming to the challenges of deinstitutionalization, one major challenge was closed institutional spaces itself. Even today, mental institutions are closed systems with entry to the institution only sanctioned if someone is meeting a doctor or a patient at the hospital. Wards are segregated by gender, and persons living within institutions are not allowed to move outside their wards unless they have been appointed to bring food for their dormitories. Boundary walls of institutions have been refurbished. The black stones that mark the architectural style of British constructions are now replaced in parts by complete concrete and barbed wire. All aspects of the institution are still geared towards segregation and concentric circles of confinement. People outside are not allowed inside, those inside are not allowed out. Another challenge was also the discharge procedure, which is still very difficult and creates a lot of barriers. Another challenge to exit from hospitals was a discharge procedure at hospitals. This process mandates notification of guardianship based on which discharge is sanctioned. Despite changes in the law, recognition that persons with disabilities can and should be allowed to exit hospitals, current discharge procedures still require someone to stand as a legal guardian of the person with psychosocial disability. Discharge is still made on the basis of this guarantee by the guardian, who is held legally responsible to support the person with disability. Incapacity, dependence, and decision-making. One of the most pervasive challenges to the process of deinstitutionalization within institutions is the presumption of incapacity of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Within the context of the project, this emerged as the doubts on their capacity to live independently outside the hospital. This transpired regardless of education or position within the institution. Doctors and management staff were aware of the rights of persons with mental illnesses, now part of 2 laws within the country, but this did not convert into changes in systems within the hospital. A large part of the work that still remains is challenging the premise of incapacity of persons with disabilities. And the evaluation of a person's capacity to function is further linked to the aspect of dependence of the person on institution. Through my work at the hospital, I understood this dependence as something that is fostered through an infantilization of the person with disability, both men and women, treating the person like a child who did not know how to take care of themselves, which in turn reiterates the medical professional's judgment of capacity. Hospital staff made decisions for all women with regards to their health, their food, eating habits, their movement, their activities during the day, and their relationships. This form of infantilization in turn affects the person's belief in their own ability to make decisions, even if they are offered choices. Women who had spent more than 3 years at the hospital did not feel ready to make decisions about their lives, including decisions to exit the hospital. This takes us to the debate of substituted versus supported decision-making within the context of persons with disabilities. Substituted decision-making based on evaluations of capacity have been the mainstay of treatments and care of persons with disabilities. Through the advocacy of rights of persons with disabilities, supported decision-making is evolving as a shift within mental health care practices. But supported decision-making is a challenge to all service providers, even those advocating for the rights of persons with disabilities. In the zeal to ensure that women have equal access to community services, well-intentioned service providers also make decisions on behalf of the person. Supported decision-making is a conscious, deliberate, and self-reflexive process of working with the person, explaining the choices available to them, discussing the consequences of choices, and supporting them in the choices they make. This includes enabling the freedom to make choices which may be different from the person supporting them. Now, some of the challenges in actually moving and living in communities, also more structural challenges. One related to documentation. This is one of the most significant challenges to all aspects of rehabilitation work, which is access to identity documents. A large number of long-stay clients admitted through court systems do not have any documents with them. For those who had families or where families were traced, locating their identity documents and accessing them was one part of the challenge. For those who did not, getting identity documentations made was a challenge despite support from the hospital. The lack of identity documents are barriers to renting houses within open communities, to opening bank accounts, to finding employment, and accessing social protection schemes available to persons with disabilities. This includes disability pensions, employment schemes, loans, etc. Social protection measures. Now, one aspect of access to social protection measures has to do with not having identity documents based on which one can make a claim for social protection. The other is also government insurance schemes, the lack of disability certificates for persons with psychosocial disabilities. So even though, or despite having lived in hospitals, women with disabilities were not given disability certificates unless they accessed it through the state government hospitals, even though they lived there for 3 years or more. The other aspect is also resettling costs. Long-stay clients have no financial security when they exit mental hospitals. Moving into a community includes costs for settling into new places, from costs for deposits for houses to setting up one's house and daily living expenses till one finds appropriate employment. This contributes to the fear of moving out of the hospital. Women who participated in the project were given a lump sum of money each month to meet costs of living in open communities. Social protection for long-stay clients moving outside institutions offers a form of financial security that allows for independent living and accessing services that are available to all, at least for a short period of time. Another challenge was housing. The Supreme Court order had mandated the construction of rehabilitation homes for long-stay recovered men and women still living at mental hospitals. While this is the first step towards movement out of the hospital, living within a rehabilitation facility is still far from living within open communities. Without systems in place for the movement outside rehabilitation homes, these homes can become versions of larger institutions with similar problems of segregation and safe custody. This also contributes to the phenomenon of trans-institutionalization, which also happened during the time of this project, where a large group of women were moved to a women's home, a group home for women outside the hospital, mostly out of pressure experienced by the hospital staff to report to the court on actions that they had taken to respond to the judgment, in response to the judgment. And another challenge is also a sense of social security. Now, this is a challenge for communities outside, which is enabling a sense of security. Within open communities, another challenge for women leaving the hospital was the insecurity of not having anyone to look out for them outside the hospital. Women wavered on their decision to move out of the hospital out of fear of being alone. These fears came from experiences of the past and from refusals of family members to support the person. These apprehensions were not confined to women moving out of hospitals. The paucity of support systems for women within open communities that allows women to make non-conventional choices was a reality for a large number of women living within open communities. To end, I would like to say the rights-based discourse and the healthcare systems discourse seems to run parallel to each other. The incorporation of rights-based language into laws allows for laws to be used as tools for advocacy, but does little in challenging the problems within institutions. Challenges in the process discussed above highlight the antagonism between healthcare systems and right-based systems of care. One demanding support services within communities, moving away from institution-based care as an option of care or service, the other making provisions for rights through reforming institutional mechanisms from admission to discharge. Any movement towards deinstitutionalization will require taking a position on the need for hospitals as a space of asylum in the country. Movements towards deinstitutionalization will require significant financial support, political and social will, and mobilization of all stakeholders within and outside systems. Most importantly, listening to the experiences of those who have lived within institutions. Thank you.
We will now move to Professor Shubhada Maitra and then come back to a discussion afterwards. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sabah, Kimberly, and others at Krea University for inviting me to give this talk. I think it's important and contemporary, has contemporary relevance, I would say, currently, particularly because of the kind of activism that is happening in the country, and judicial activism, as well as other kinds of activism and the rights-based movement around persons with mental illness. So I think this is a very timely webinar, although I see that the number of students is really small, but I think numbers don't really matter. I don't believe that numbers matter. So as long as we're able to be ignited by some of the thoughts that come to our mind after these two presentations, I think for me, that would be good enough. I have organized my presentation in two parts, in a manner of speaking. One is the historical context and the current realities, some of which Kimberly has already touched upon. So when I come to that point, I'm going to quickly move over it, and the participants can later ask us questions and ask us to elaborate. The other part is, while we read a lot of academic and theoretical stuff and things like that about deinstitutionalization and, community-based mental health services, we really don't know are not clear enough about the how-to of the process, the recipe for the. So I'm going to share what we do at Tarasha. The second part of the presentation is based on Tarasha and our wisdom as we grew. Tarasha grew and we grew along with Tarasha. So that's the second part of the presentation. Sabah, if I'm going over time, I have a watch right here, but if I'm going over time, just raise your hand or warn me. Okay. All right. So background of mental health services in India, and this is something that if you are mental health students and students of psychology, you should know some of these things. that we have 43 mental hospitals, largely in urban areas all across India. And then we have how our health services organized. We have, after the tertiary care mental hospitals, then we have the general hospital psychiatric units in public hospitals, again in cities. We have the National Mental Health Program, which is a rural district-based mental health program, which was started in 1982 with great ambitions, but located within the biomedical paradigm. And through all of that, we still know that the National Mental Health Program is largely a dysfunctional program. So recently, if you have been up with news around mental health, you would know that the program was allocated, and I'm talking about Maharashtra state, 160 crores. Out of that, Maharashtra state spent only 8 crores on the National Mental Health Program. Now that's not even 10%, it's like 5%. As it is, budgetary allocation to mental health is less than 1% of the 1 to 2%, I would say, of the budget. But given that small budget, if you cannot spend what you are allocated, then what are the services on the ground is something that one would really question. So the National Mental Health Program is largely dysfunctional, except in some states where it is, say for example, Tamil Nadu, I think it's a good functional program. But Maharashtra, so it's very absolutely not uniformly organized in terms of mental health services for the rural population. And then we have the private hospitals, nursing homes, counseling centers, walk-in facilities, things like, again, for the privileged few. So these are the mental hospitals, 8 states that do not have a single mental hospital. These are Haryana, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Mizoram, Chhattisgarh, and Telangana. Otherwise, you have the states listed that have a mental hospital. Let's look at the historical context. And Kimberly has talked about, so I don't want to gloss over it too much, but we had, when we started way back, it was the custodial approach to keep people with mental illness away from society. So treatment, care, and rehabilitation were really not the goals. And then I would say in the late 70s, early 80s, there were public interest litigations. If you read Amita Dhanda's articles, and she was the one who had done some public interest litigations also, but there is a very good article by Amita Dhanda on public interest litigations. And we talked about human rights violations. The National Human Rights Commission did a study in 1997, and from the public interest litigations of the 70s and the 80s, to the 1997, when this quality assurance of mental health services was done by NHS, not much had changed. So every time there was a litigation, there was symptomatic change, and that is it. But no one looked at the overall conditions of persons with mental illness. Then we had also, much before the 70s, I'm saying, but one of the historical contexts for deinstitutionalization is the pharmacological advancement. So we had 4th generation drugs that could manage mental illnesses very well. And therefore, in the Western countries also, we felt that yes, we can deinstitutional. They don't need to be in the hospital 24/7, not in a custodial facility. And of course, more recently, we had the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability, which focused on the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And then 10 years later, we had the Mental Health Care Act, which again, it's a rights base. So we have moved away from the Indian Lunacy Act to the Mental Health Act of 1987 to 2017. And it's almost taken us, 50 years to change legislations around recognizing the rights of persons with mental illness. But what has changed on the ground is my question. Because while we have these progressive legislations, rights-based, Kimberly talked about many provisions, what's working on the ground and how is it? In fact, many of the states have not even formed rules around to implement the Mental Health Care Act. So we are still following the Mental Health Act of 1987 in many states. So what is taking so long? I mean, 5 years down a progressive legislation, and yet we have public interest litigations, and which again, Kimberly talked about Advocate Kumar Bansal, but I will come to that. Okay, what are the consequences in the West? What have been the consequences of, thankfully, we haven't gone the deinstitutionalization way, but we are not far from there. So in the West, what has happened is that there was a complete, so it was a pendulum from institutionalization, locking up, keep them away, to complete deinstitutionalization without adequate preparation on the ground to receive people with mental health needs. Okay, there were hardly any community-based services. And there was also an absence of facilities for social reintegration. How do you discharge people who have been in the hospital for so many years, perhaps decades, who haven't seen the outside world, who haven't interacted with them, and suddenly you discharge them? There was also a burden on families, and what we had in the Western countries was what I call SOS, schizophrenia on the street. So there was, of course, severe mental illness, but there was also homelessness. And these twin problems didn't do any good for persons with mental illness or their families. Let's look at what the law says in India. Okay, this is the chapter 5 that talks about the rights of persons with mental health, with mental illness, and you can read this, that this is essentially emphasizing that long-term care and mental health establishments should be only under exceptional circumstances, for as short a duration as possible, and should be the last resort when appropriate community-based treatment has been tried and shown to have failed. What are therefore the appropriate community-based treatments? What are the models that we know of? These community-based models of mental health care can be counted in our country, can be counted really on our fingers. And what do families? So I have a feminist critique of the family, but it is also a reality that given our poverty and socioeconomic stress that families experience, there are many families that are not able to care for persons with mental illness. How many daycare centers does your city have? Okay, what are the other community-based is something that we need to, it's all very well to have these provisions without actually seeing what's the reality on the ground. Chapter 5 again, that people have a right, a person with mental illness has a right to live in, and don't please ignore the male pronoun. Of course, the law is it gender neutral? No, it's not gender neutral. It's in favor of the men. Because if we only recognize the presence of men, have a right to live in, be part of, and not be segregated from society, and not continue to remain in the mental health establishment just because he doesn't have a family or not accepted by his family or is homeless or whatever. So this is what the law says. No long stay admissions, short duration, treat in the community, have mental health. And on the basis of the law, more recently, after the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, Gaurav Bansal has filed petitions on the issue of long stay patients in mental hospitals. This has led the Supreme Court to take cognizance of the fact, cognizance of the condition of long stay patients in mental hospitals. And what did the Supreme Court say? Say open halfway homes. I have a thing against halfway homes because these are another set of institutions, and you are just promoting chronicity from the mental hospital, pushing people into halfway homes. And therefore, what has been the response by state health services? In Maharashtra, what we did was, because there should not be long stay patients in the hospitals, we quickly discharged. And where did we put? We put them in beggars' homes. We put them in Mahila ashrams for women. We put them in old age homes. So suddenly the numbers in the hospitals looked wonderful. And then where are the rights of people with mental illness? What are we, how are we addressing the treatment and care needs? Forget rehabilitation and recovery. I mean, these are knee-jerk reactions, and then rights be damned. As long as we don't show numbers, long stay patients in the hospital, and we show that patients are being discharged, but what about the treatment? So, you know, even these petitions around the issue of long stay patients are a little, I mean, we are raising the issue of rights of persons with mental illness, but it has to have an ants as well as a bird's eye view. It cannot have, you know, blinkers on the eyes and say, well, this is the. So I'm going to quickly do introducing Tarasha in the background. So first, the background. This is the hospital, Thana Mental Hospital, Regional Mental Hospital Thana, from where we work. We have permission to show pictures from the women. We work exclusively with women, okay? Tarasha works there. This is in the ward, and the purpose of showing the picture is, I'm going to show you the transition of this thing. So Tarasha has grown organically. We started in 2011 based on a study that I had undertaken in 2002. I'm not going to go into the details. If you want more details, we can have it in the discussion. But that study in 2002 highlighted long stay, the problem of long stay patients. Women, this was a study on status of women in mental hospitals in Maharashtra. And the duration of the stay for most women in the hospital was between a few months to more than 20 years. It was a mixed method study, so women also talked about their experiences of violence and abuse. And all women, when I asked the question, what are your aspirations? How do you see the future? Women said, we want to stand on our own feet. Disenchantment, they don't want to go back to their families, and they want to rub away the image of a mad woman. So these three things came very clearly from, let's move to how women grow old in the institution. Again, 2002. The lighter color is when women are admitted. So most women were admitted between their early 20s to early 30s. And then if you look at the dark blue is the current age, okay? 31 to 45 is the current age of women in hospitals, and age at admission reduces. So you see how women grow old in the institution as age increases. Now that was a finding that stayed with me. Now, why is it? Because women are just put in the institution. So only 25% of the women in 2002 lived for less than 1 year in the hospital, but 75%, you're able to see my icon, I hope, 75% of the women stayed between 1 year to 10 years. And 69% women were admitted by their families, and yet leave of absence was given to only 30% of the women. So what happened to this 70% of the women who were admitted by their families, but the families never came back? So the phenomenon of abandonment was very clear as far as women with mental illness was concerned. So Tarasha is a field action project of the Center for Health and Mental Health, of which I'm a part. It's a community-based recovery and reintegration project. We focus on identity issues and mainstreaming mental health, and we have partnerships on the ground. We do not believe in creating parallel structures. We think there are enough resources in the community. We should tap these resources. We tightly tie up psychosocial issues because of the history of mental illness, livelihoods because they have to sustain themselves in the community, and safe shelters because women have no properties no money on their name, okay? Women with long-term mental illness abandoned in the mental hospital do not even have any documents to prove their identity. So in that sense, they are persona non grata. Now, if they have to do livelihoods and take care of themselves, they need safe shelters. So we tie up with working women's hostels where you and I would stay, and our women stay in working women's hostels, go to a vocational training program, and go to a daycare center to take care of their. Now, how do we do deinstitutionalization? The first phase is a very intensive phase at the hospital where we do individual and group sessions. This is also the phase where we shortlist women, check with women whether they would like to come with us at every step of the, we follow feminist model of intervention and feminist framework and lens to look at women and women's agency, and therefore we do not do anything without women's consent. So we ask them whether they'd like to come out with Tarasha. We tell them what Tarasha does. Once they agree, and this phase, the institutionalization phase, we prepare women in a manner of speaking to get out of the hospital after so many years of institutionalization. The next is psychosocial recovery and rehabilitation. They go to a daycare center within the community for 3 months and therefore intermingle with both men and women with severe mental illness. They explore issues related to self, but they also, by doing this, going out of the working women's hostel, they're exploring the city, they're negotiating public spaces, they're claiming spaces within society. They're also following a routine to say, I'll get up at this time, I will catch this train, I will be at the center at a particular time. The next 3 months is vocational training. Again, they choose a vocation of their choice. Until now, our women have been trained in housekeeping, hospitality, vocational retail and sales, hospitality, and printing technology, and more recently, home-based care. After vocational training, we do not provide any jobs to women. The Vocational Training Institute provides jobs. And once they get a job, it is very important to support them. So we do job development and support at the workspace. We also do sessions at the workspace, mental health sessions at the workspace, in order to destigmatize and begin a discourse around mental health. And we actively encourage women to exit from the project once they are financially independent and doing well. We continue to support them psychosocially. We continue to provide counseling support, but we do a contract, just like when they enter, they do a contract. When they exit, they do a contract and say, we are exiting voluntarily. This is also because we want them to be independent. I don't want anyone to look upon Tarasha as my bap, you know. We are not guardians. We don't want to be guardians. We are not family. We are a project, and this is what we wish to do. These are our women in the group sessions in the hospital. This is the deinstitutionalization phase. These are the women in the mental hospital, working women's hostels. We do all this painting of the wall and all, so that it's a vibrant, nice atmosphere. And at the center, in front of the blackboard, is our program manager, Ashwini Surwase. She has been with Tarasha and with me since 2012, 10 years. And yes, like I said, Tarasha was born in 2011, and we have grown with the project. This is our first batch of women after completing their vocational training program. And these are our women at a cultural program at SIAS. What is it? What is the lens? I talked about a feminist lens, but I think we have done a paradigm shift as far as looking at women. And this paradigm shift you will not find in a book. This has come organically when I began thinking, what is it that we do? So from protection, to say no, single women, we cannot discharge them, state assumes guardianship. Where will they go? If they go on the streets, they will be raped, they don't have shelter. We say recognize women's agency. Even women like you and I get harassed. Who's protecting us? And why should we deny women the chance to be on their own? So from protection, neither the state nor we as a project need to protect women. These are all adult women. We must recognize women's agency. They do not have families. So constantly bemoaning the absence of a family is something that is very, very tiring. To say, oh my God, I don't have family. Of course not. And you are my family. I say, no, 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 we are not your family. We are a project. To say, create your own networks. You have so many wonderful networks in the community, in the hostel, in the daycare center, in the vocational training center, and finally in your employment place. So you foster, so not dependence on family, but foster economic independence and expand your social networks from marginalization to mainstreaming. Now, mainstreaming is a concept that Patricia Deegan has talked about. She's a survivor, great woman. If you can read her book, read her writings, very inspiring writings. And she talks about not mainstreaming, but about the mainstream becoming so wide as to accept differences and diversity. So we don't want to mainstream in that sense that persons with mental illness lose their identity and become like you and me. No, they're not like you and me. Of course, we are also like them in many ways. But to say that, yes, there are persons with special needs and they are different and they are diverse and we need to, and it's not just there for persons with mental illness, but also other minorities that we need to think about when we talk of marginalized identities. From pathology, so if there is pathology, there is mental illness, normalize it. We don't move towards that. We recognize the individuality, the uniqueness of each of our women. And like I said, we work only with women. From changing the person, we say change the environment. And therefore, we need to do a lot of advocacy, particularly while taking women in vocational training centers. They have a certain age group and our women are beyond the age group. It's not easy to just organize a vocational training institute and say, take our women who are 30 and 35 and 38, where the average age of people who come for vocational training is 22. Similarly, organizations, okay, but that is another story. From institutionalization, so our women, you know, when I first met women in 2002 and way before that in 90s, when I used to supervise students in the mental hospital, women would enact, what's your name? I am so and so not known. Can you imagine suffixing a not known identity after your name? That name is also given to you by your hospital. And so there is really, I mean, it is a very, when I began questioning not known, these are women admitted by the police. Not known matlab kya? How can you not know who you are? And therefore, we move from institutionalization to freedom and choice every step of the, from survivor, they are not survivors. Survivor becomes a profession in that sense. You survive child sexual abuse, you survive mental illness. They are participants to the program, so they choose, they decide. Lots of times women are particularly told, this is my last slide, Sabah, if you are stressing, control over emotions. Don't show anger. Don't be angry, then you will be labeled mad. We say anger is good. But what you do with that anger is important. So how do you channel your anger to bring about change? We tell women, in the deinstitutionalization phase, we do this to get in touch with your emotions. Be angry, but express anger in a way that you don't flip and express anger in a way that keeps the other person's dignity intact. Channelize your anger to change your circumstances is what we take. And from rehabilitation, which is rooted in the biomedical concept, we say recovery as a process which is non-linear, and therefore when our women experience relapse or their symptoms begin recurring, we have to step up our support. Even though they have exited the project and they come to us, and then we have to organize ourselves differently to step up support or readmit the woman in the hospital, and that readmission or relapse is not seen as our failure. Is seen as a process of recovery. I mean, my blood sugar levels keep fluctuating, and so does mental illness. So this is essentially the story of deinstitutionalization, and we have successfully, our women, once they are deinstitutionalized, once they are discharged, they are able to maintain their recovery process for a good 5-6 years. From 2011 batch, we have women who have had some problems in between, but largely our recovery rates are much better than anyone else, than definitely the mental hospitals. And I will stop here. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Professor Maitra. I think that what we can see is that in community psychology, while like this time has been about trying to deinstitutionalize, but there are so many models in which it can be done and so many ways in which it should not be done. And so I think that something that we are exploring in class is also the different kinds of community mental health initiatives and how different organizations respond to local contexts. So something which cannot actually be perhaps generalized or made universal, but so this was just something I'd like to start the conversation with, and then we can open up, to everyone else. Is that, could you perhaps tell me about anything that is so particular to the space that you have worked in, that perhaps it works with this community, the people you're working with, and it tells us something about the community, but it may not be something that can be taken elsewhere, or at least in its direct form.
Who are you asking? Anyone particular you're directing the question?
This is one question I had, that, say in both Tarasha or Bapu Trust, what would have been something very local that your organization worked with, but is, it's just a learning for that local context?
Well, I would say, Sabah, that our model, the Tarasha model, which started in 2011, can be replicated anywhere. Okay, because we are tying up shelters, vocational training, and psychosocial care. We are not doing rocket science, I believe. We are doing very, very basic stuff at the hospital, outside the hospital, tapping community resources and all of that. But the way we thought and conceptual, so like I said, Tarasha has grown organically from the research findings, from what women wanted, their aspirations. A funder came along, we were actually offered money to start a halfway home. And I said, no way I'm going to start a halfway home. I want to do a community-based project. We were the first organization in the country, the first project in the country in 2013 to do PAN cards and bank accounts for women. So again, identity issues, citizenship rights. Now everyone has started all mental health projects across the country, whether it is Bapu Trust, Kimberly will know, or whether it is Anjali or any other, have started doing PAN cards and Aadhaar cards, and so much so that the hospital is doing Aadhaar cards without any thinking, and they have on that Aadhaar card regional mental hospital as the address. Now, is there any more stigma than that when people get out? So thinking, I mean, it's the lens, and I think that this, I don't know what is local. Perhaps it is more urban based in the sense that we can find a daycare center or we can find working women's hostels. But if these services are not there in a place, I think we can still do something around that. Like I said, it's not rocket science, and this is something that can be replicated anywhere, except that we are working only with women and our wisdom is limited to women. We don't know how to work with men.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Kimberly, would you like to also weigh in here?
I think I agree with a lot of with what Shubhada has also shared with us. I think access to services requires that there are services, community services. So, but I also think something that could be I don't think it's particular to the location only, but it is also particular to the way in which you interact with people, which is also to keep questioning whether this is systemic or this is individual. Like a lot of the things are actually systemic, but when we keep individualizing it to the person as something they can't do, or something like, and I think that's where I think that requires a lot of work for any service provider. So including rights-based frameworks, that's what I think even some of our team members kept making or taking calls for another person. And then we had to regroup and say, oh no, like, what are we doing here? Why are we taking a call for someone else? They can take, so participation is really hard for any service provider. And keep remembering that it is a participation and not necessarily something you need to do for someone. I think that's important. I think that was specific, and because the project worked very closely with the UNCRPD, it also allowed itself to be challenged. Like the community processes were challenged, existing community systems. The other was also working with community members, working with neighborhood spaces to also not necessarily to talk about the person, but to be able to just introduce the person to a community. For a lot of women, they were entering the community after 3 years, 10 years. This community was also new for them. It was not the community that they exited from. So a lot of the things that we did was also working with the neighborhoods. I think we were equipped in a way that we already had a presence in those existing communities for nearly 10, 15 years. So that enabled the inclusion process. So having a community program that really works in the same lines facilitated that part.
Thank you. I actually have lots of things that I'd like to ask, but perhaps first let's see if there is someone in our, like, in the rest of the group who'd like to ask something. Okay. So yeah, please do raise your hands. Ira has raised her hand. So first, Ira. Yeah, go ahead, Ira.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was really, really enriching. And I actually got quite a few questions, but I think the most interesting sort of understanding that I got from yours is not looking at your like the patients that you're helping as your family, because that is something that a lot of NGOs, social workers, and anyone who is trying to help anyone at the margins does, and they look at them as family. And there is an integration of the familial unit into this attempt to construct a family into different things. So I actually found that really interesting. And I also wanted to just ask you, how would you place psychiatry and the psychiatric medicine and its role in, say, how would you place that and the sort of far-reaching effects that it has on individual psyche, but also as a large as used as a control mechanism as well. But how would you place that in terms of this debate and this understanding of mental health care being and deinstitutionalizing?
Shall we take a group of questions, and then actually here I'd actually leave it to the speakers. Do you think we should take a group of questions, or should we?
We could, and it would also help if the participants ask a specific speaker the question rather than both of us, talking about the same thing in different ways.
Yes.
So yeah, that would help us remain streamlined. So this question that Ira asked, who was it meant for, Ira?
I think Professor Maitra could answer it.
Okay, thank you. Sabah, you want to take a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'll do that. Shama?
So I have a question for Shubhada ma'am. So I was just wondering, when you were talking about Tarasha, so the place where Tarasha is situated, so I just want, so it's interesting, and I'm just curious to know that, like before Tarasha came into place and came into being, So how was people's attitude then? And then afterwards, now that Tarasha is this whole body and it's growing and, like every day. So because I remember Professor Kimberly talked about, the neighborhoods, like working with neighborhoods and all this. So I wanted to know this from you. How did it happen with Tarasha? Like people's attitude and behavior around mental health or stigma around it. So how did it change, if at all there is a change? So yeah.
So even my question was to Professor Mitra. So you talked about the deinstitutionalization phase in Tarasha, the phase 1, right? And you talked about obtaining consent and asking them to be associated with the project. So I was just wondering that if these women have been in the hospitals like for 20, 30 years, it may be that when we are asking them to, attach with the program, would it be expected that they may not know now that what's better, in the sense, or that they may have in the sense, how do you navigate hope in such situations? Like if you're used to living in a hospital with stringent rules, you may get used to it in a sense, and when someone offers you hope, a ray of light, you may deny that, not because you don't think it's better for you, but because just you're so used to the thing.
Thank you all of you for raising these questions. Yes, to Ira, I would say that, my first battle was with the Directorate of Health Services when I took the idea of the project to her, and I said women will be discharged from the hospital and not go with us on leave of absence. And that time we were governed by the 87 Mental Health Act. And she said, but if they have a relapse, you will have to go through the judicial process. And I said, yes, I will go through the judicial process, but I will not be family, I will not be guardian, because if I become that, and if there is a family and guardian, the women don't need Tarasha. They can go back to their family. The fact that they need Tarasha is because the family has failed them. And therefore, I don't. Within half an hour, I tell you, she gave us permission for discharge. Now, again, first project in the country to get women discharged from the hospital and not be given leave of absence. And of course, our women had relapses. So a couple of them, we did go to the court and, try to readmit them in the hospital. But I was very clear and I stayed very firm to say I am not family. And I think I don't feel ashamed to say I'm not family. I think I carry the conviction of my perspective, my lens on my shoulders. And I said, well, I will do this. I will not do that. And I'm willing to engage in a discussion with the decision makers at the state level to say why we will not. You asked a question of role of medication. I am a medical and psychiatric social worker trained as Ashwini as a clinical psychologist. And both of us understand the social and the mental world. We don't understand the chemical locha that happens at the brain level. So I do not know what medicines do or don't do. I definitely know that people who are on medication are able to maintain their recovery, but there are also side effects of those medications. There are devastating side effects, from slurring to lethargy to, drooling, to many other these things. And therefore, we monitor our women. So for Tarasha, women who come out with Tarasha, not taking medication is not the answer. They have to do medical adherence. I will also tell you the story of advocates. So there are many mental health advocates, and young people like you should go and talk to these advocates to say, how do they do medicines? Do they do or don't they do? And when the mental health advocates who are survivors or, have a history of mental illness themselves say that we don't do medication, remember they have a strong, very, very strong safety net and support system to hold them. They are not allowed to fall. Our women are not like that. So on what grounds will I tell a woman, I know this, that when women don't pop the pill in their mouth and throw it over their shoulder, they have a relapse and they are set back by 5 years. This is my personal experience. So I say I am not playing. Gabor Gombosch, who died recently, mental health advocate, a writer of the UNCRPD, he had come to the institute. He carried his medicines, psychiatric medicines with him. Everywhere he went, he carried his prescription with him. Because it's not just this thing, kink, that I say medical adherence should be done. But this is after engaging in, so I don't want to throw out the biomedical model. And remember, as young students, before throwing out anything, you have to know it thoroughly. Don't discard just because jhanda uthana hai, just because you want to do advocacy. There have been advocacy organizations who said we will do only research and advocacy and no services. And that research and advocacy without services is of no use. So that's Ira's this thing. Don't get me talking, okay?
Thank you so much, Professor. That really helped to put perspective. And let me know when I could ask my next question.
Wait, we will finish. People's attitudes. So when I did my study in 2002, I will say that we have one image of people with mental illness. Bizarre, hopping mad, violent, tearing clothes, unpredictable, dangerous, all of that. And when I did my recommendations, my first line of that report was public images of mental illness should change, because that is now not how mental illness is presented. So when our women got discharged from the hospital and came into the working women's hostel, of course, again, deinstitutionalization, we talk about disclosure, we talk about stigma and discrimination, we talk about whether you will and that it is your right to tell about your history or not tell about your history of hospitalization. So when women got out of the hospital, I was surprised to see some women talking to their hostel mates, "Main Thana Mental se aayi. I've come from Thana Mental." I said, wow, that's very brave. And I didn't say anything because remember, women's agency, it's for them to see how stigma is operational. And yet women are smart, they're not stupid. So when they are disclosing their mental illness in the hostel and continue to be accepted, people are very accepting, you just have to talk. At the workplace, they didn't. At the vocational training, they did. Workplace, they didn't, because workplace stigma around mental illness still persists. And that is why we have started, like I said, Tarasha has grown organically. We have another arm of Tarasha. We work with the mental hospital and women and get them discharged and on their feet within a year of their discharge. But we also work with corporate organizations to create a discourse around mental health and reduce the stigma and discrimination. So women, again, we say that while self-disclosure is a very political process and must be done, everyone is not Deepika Padukone to say, I did go through depression. And stars can say it and still be accepted. I know our women can't. Okay, so they have to decide what. But people's attitudes are gradually, organizations are opening up. They want us to talk about mental, and this is not post-COVID. We started this in 1819. And they're happy to, and they are recognizing mental health issues among their. Last one, how do you navigate hope? Some of our women, so not 30 years, women, we don't take women. So we have criteria. Sorry, I do ageism, and I do ageism only, not anything else. So we do asymptomatic women, but we take women up to only maximum limit, age limit is 50 years. Ideally, we would like to stop at 45, but there are some women who we work with. Why? Because we want women to stand on their own feet. And we want, no organization will employ a person like me. Okay, 1 foot in the grave. You don't want people like that. You want people who can work, who can contribute to a productive workforce. These are also women who have no skills, who have very little formal education, 6 to 8 standard, not even completed the 10th standard. To pick up skills, vocational skills, and mainstream vocations, not chaddi, blouse, silna, kadhai, bunai, achar, papad, that never got anyone any livelihood, okay? So mainstream occupations you have to do something. When we started in 2011, our condition was that women get at least 6,500 to 7,000 rupees. That's the amount women needed to live in Bombay. Hostel fees, food, travel, sanitary things, powder, soap, all of that, and a little bit money to rub your hands with. I want to gift myself something. I want to go see Salman Khan's movie. I want to eat a samosa. Shiv Mandir mein jaake mujhe prasad chadana hai. So that is rubbing your hands with money. Okay. So women needed that. Today our women are earning anything between starting 9 to 10,000 rupees to 15 to 17,000 rupees. Now that's economic independence. I don't want to do tokenism. Okay. So when women, we don't take 30 women who have lived there 30 years, maximum 8, 10, 15 years. And when women come out, oh, well, of course, they see Tarasha as hope, but some women also don't want. Women have told us, they said, मेरे को बाहर जाके काम नहीं करना, मेरे को शादी करना है. And we say, reuniting with the family is not our goal. Getting you married is not our goal. So if you are coming out with Tarasha because you want us to reunite you with the family, sorry, there are enough and more organizations that are doing that. Restitution, reintegration with the family. Award winners are doing it. I don't want to do it. Okay, because I know after that family, they will come back to the hospital in 3 months. हमारे साथ निकलती है तो they stay sane for 6 years. So then women say, no, we don't want to come out. And then there are women who say, yes, we are willing to stand on our own feet. We are willing to work hard, get up at 7, wash our own clothes, hop onto the train at 8:30, come back home in the evening, do our dabba and, all of that. And agar usme love ho jata hai, family ho jata hai, shadi ho jata hai, well and good. And some of our women have settled like that. They have had babies, they're married, they're living in the community. We don't, but they create their own paths. But we don't work towards that. We work towards financial independence. We work towards recovery and reintegration. कि mainstream occupation की इस तरह से बैठो कि no one will know that you have a history of mental illness. And yes, when you have special needs, you have special needs. And we are there then to hold those. So our 3 questions. I hope I have answered.
Perhaps while we wait for some more questions to come up, I wanted to ask Kimberly that, the questions were directed to Professor Maitra, but would you have any response, anything that you also thought while the discussion was happening that you'd like to tell us?
I was also thinking about the medical adherence question. And I think in our experience, the women actually did not have that much of, they were not high doses of medication because they were recovered clients. They had like just about 1 pill, which was a maintenance dose. And a lot of the other medication though is the side effects of long-term like confinement, which is a lot, and also side effects of medication. So a lot of heart problems, diabetes, chronic illnesses, which requires other forms of medication. So I think the adherence part was not about psychiatric adherence, like adherence to psychiatric medication, but adherence to adherence to taking care of oneself and how to do that. Which again, because you're in the institution, you're told that you have diabetes, but you're not explained as to what you're supposed to do to take care of yourself. So a lot of the work that we did once women exited was working with them to say okay, this is this is how you can take care of your other health conditions as well. These are the medications that you are taking. They did not know what medications they were taking. So like really working with them and saying that, okay, these are the medications, these are the timings, how to go back and get medication, how to access health systems when you require it, general health hospital systems, those kind of things is what we did. But we didn't feel the need, and we saw women actually decreasing medication over time as well. Once they started living outside, once they started forming other relationships, the requirement for medication decreased, and the psychiatrists themselves decreased the medications over time. So we also see those shifts taking place once people start coming out, not requiring a dependence on the drug in the same way.
Okay, so thank you. We'll move to Shama's question, and since there aren't other questions right now, I have a question for each of you. So I'd like to, yeah. So Shama, first you.
Yeah. So this question is for both the speakers, Professor Kimberly and Professor Shubhada. So I just wanted to know that, do you hire people like young people like me who are passionate about working in these spaces? And if so, then what are some of the criteria? Yeah,
we hire. We are looking for good people, committed people, people who will give us the project 3-4 years at least, want to grow with the project. And we don't have a lot of money. We are not internationally funded. So yeah, if you want to grow with the organization, we are happy to have people, young people like you, with stars in your eyes, and you just have to write to us and we will have a chat, and we can make space for people who are wanting to associate with Tarasha.
So Shama actually has asked something that I wanted to ask you, Professor Maitra, that can you tell the students in the room what kind of training or skills could help them do this kind of work in the future? A lot of our students are third year and fourth year undergraduate, fourth year is a postgraduate diploma. But about careers, that they have these questions, and for those who might be interested in doing this kind of work.
Right. So this is, I would say, this is an intersection between social work and psychology, psychiatry. Okay, now because I have a degree in medical and psychiatric social work all time. Okay. I understand psychiatry, but I also understand the social world. What students need right now, a good hold on your curriculum. Okay, perspective building we can do, but it's good to have your own critique, your own understanding. I think, I tell all my students not to be sponges, that you absorb everything. You look at the knowledge, critically look at it, to say, what is this? Now, just to give you an example, terminology. I talked about survivor and participant. Some of these things we use without questioning, without scrutinizing. What does it mean? So we want students with a passion. And because Tarasha works only with women, I want students who are women-centered, women-oriented, understand women's world, and willing to engage. But I don't expect them to have a particular theoretical or political gaze. The other thing is what kind of, apart from projects like these, which are a plenty, there are many projects. So for example, Banyan is there closer home, but there is Anjali for people who speak Bengali, because a lot of their work is on the ground, and Ratna recently won an award from the president. And so there are these projects, very, very leadership kind of projects, to name, I would say Anjali, Banyan and Bapu. But there are others like Ishwar Shankalpo and, many other organizations in and around Chennai. Even in Bombay, you would. So you could do that. You could work in schools. Because I understand you do a psychology program and you have a community psychology. You could work in schools, you could be associated in NGOs and take mental health to the ground. So my critique of psychology as a discipline, sorry to say, is a little bit like, we don't, people with a psychology background don't engage with political realities. And the perspective is largely, I'm not saying everyone, if you do community psychology, of course, it is not true what I'm saying, but the perspective is deficit in the individual, fix the individual. We are not looking at the detrimental social, environmental, cultural conditions. So when I said to you that every woman talked about a history of abuse and all, I have a theory that there is abuse and there is mental illness. The two are, so if you don't understand women's lived realities and only think, oh, she has depression, CBT karo uske saath. If only she changed the way she thought, or REBT karo. That's not it. If you do that, a woman will continue to be depressed. There's so much control. Of course, CBT will work. I'm not saying it will not work. But her husband beats her up unless the detrimental conditions are changed. Depression is not going to go away. Why do our women maintain recovery for 6 and 7 years? Because they're living in it. It's not like I'm doing rocket science with them. They're living in an environment that is vital, throbbing, masti wali environment with full freedom hai, jo karna chaho karo.
Kimberly, actually wanted you to, one question I had was that this term that you used, like, I think we need just a little bit of breaking up of it, like trans-institutionalization. Like, what is the thing trans-institutionalization?
Trans what?
Yeah.
Institutionalization. Kimberly used this term.
Not me.
Yeah, Kimberly used this term, and I was wanting her to, open it up a little bit. Like,
so trans-institutionalization is the movement of people from one institution to another institution. And so you will find many people either in beggars' homes, moved to beggars' homes, considered homeless, recovered, but so the movement of people, and I think Shubhada touched on it in her presentation as well, where she spoke about how women are just moved because you need to show on paper that the number of your beds and have decreased. Or the number of persons who were there before are not there anymore. So the movement, so you transfer them into different spaces, like other institutions as well. So, and that's the trans-institutionalization phenomenon.
I think a little bit about also how it's like the revolving door of mental health services, right? Like, people are just perhaps moving between different services. And it's the challenge of actually doing mental health work per se.
So in America, when they did their teams, and the challenges that they faced was they found more people with mental illnesses in homeless shelters, or they found them in prison. So the number of persons with mental illnesses were incarcerated a lot more, and so they recognized trans-institutionalization as movement out of institutions to other forms of institutions. So that is how it was seen there. Over here, it is beggars' homes, and like where you were just picked up and moved in, or like I think Shubhada mentioned, ashrams. That this happened even while we were doing this project, where a large group of women were just moved out to an older women's ashram, and then they were all brought back again after some time. This happens also between mental hospitals. So a large group of people from Thane will be moved to Pune, and from Pune will be, so that kind of movement also. None of them are informed about why they're being moved, what is going to happen after movement, none of that. So sometimes family members can be traced in a different state altogether, or a different hospital altogether. So there are many more complexities surrounding this phenomenon as well.
Okay, thank you. I think that we've actually come to the end. So anyways, Professor Shubhada, like a lot of faculty and students left because classes started
Yeah,
now.
this time class is happening. I've been seeing the messages. That's okay.
Yeah. So I think we'll draw it to a close here. Obviously, this is a conversation that doesn't end here and doesn't end now. And perhaps in the future, we should come together again to discuss some more of these. I just wanted to introduce Professor Maitra to this class. So I have 5 students in my class, that is Shama, Sanjana, Priyanka, Nairan, and Sajnani. And we have been like, so it's a small class, but we have been trying to think about community mental health, and each of them is going to be studying one institution, that one community mental health project in India. So perhaps we'd share the posters once they are ready with you, if you'd like to see them.
Absolutely happy to, yeah.
So anyways, thank you both for joining us. Okay, Sai, last question. I don't want to end on like cutting you off, so just go ahead and ask it.
I'm so sorry, I sent it.
How did Tarasha navigate disruptions during the pandemic? Yeah.
Many of our women were in the working women's hostels, and they had to stay indoors. Some who were employed in home-based care, they stayed home. What got disrupted was the hospital services. The work that we do in, the group sessions, and that are so vital. So for almost 2 years, the women in the hospitals were cut off. And that is my grouse that, the state government cannot, we could have done online sessions. We are talking today, I mean, look, there is such a gap between the political rhetoric, I really feel angry, political rhetoric and the kind of resources. So we are talking today from top, not bottom, about digital India, digitalization. Kahan hai digital India? Never in my life have I been so acutely aware of the digital divide. So that was a disruption that we couldn't do sessions, but we stayed in touch. We did telephone counseling, and you can connect with Ashwini later to, she's here, and to say how did this thing happen. But we held our women very strongly, and I'm happy to say that 1 or 2 women had a little bit of difficulty, and they had to be readmitted, and the hospital took them because of the relationship that we had. But other women stayed well, A couple of them lost their jobs, and but we worked with the employer to say that you will, give a month's salary or something like that. But yeah, I think it was not the women who were in touch with us, who were outside, we held them up well. Hospital, we could not do the sessions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, with that, I'm going to draw today's session to a close, and thank everybody involved for coming and participating and sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much.
I'm just seeing Kimberly's message, and thank you so much, Kimberly. And yeah, all of you who have been here, thank you, Sabah and Kimberly, for organizing this and inviting us to present our work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Professor Maitra will be in touch for sure.
Okay. I'd love to. Yeah.